The Trump administration just authorized the CIA to operate in Venezuela as part of its escalating campaign to force its leader, Nicolás Maduro, to step down, with Trump openly considering the option of military strikes in Venezuela. When asked about his new policy, Trump simply referred to immigration and drug smuggling as explanations. Now, what do CIA operations and possible military strikes have to do with immigrants and drugs? Welcome to Buried Origins. Today we'll explore exactly that, so let's get into it. Okay, now the first thing to mention is that this isn't actually the first time that Trump has used his infamous maximum pressure policy against Venezuela in an attempt to remove its leader, Maduro. He did so in his first term as well. Now, it didn't happen right away because many of the officials he chose for his administration restrained his more aggressive tendencies. But then in 2019, Trump conducted a purge of those who disagreed with him, and brought on people like John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, and Elliott Abrams, who all championed aggressive foreign policy and were advocates for pursuing regime change against countries that were unfriendly to the US. For example, Trump's choice of envoy to Venezuela, Elliott Abrams, was famously one of the younger Bush's neocon advisors that argued successfully for overthrowing Saddam Hussein in the Iraq War, a decision that, funnily enough, Trump has criticized endlessly. So then the first Trump administration was stacked with hardliners, and from 2019, it put its maximum pressure campaign against Venezuela into full swing, recognizing the Venezuelan political opposition's leader, Juan Guaidó, as the official leader of Venezuela, which led to the severing of diplomatic ties between the two countries. Trump placed sanctions on Venezuela and led an international movement to ostracize the country, with dozens of other countries recognizing Guaidó as the official leader of the country. Guaidó then attempted to lead a popular uprising with all of this momentum in 2019, but it failed quickly with a lack of support from the Venezuelan military. Once it became clear that Guaidó would not be able to overthrow the government, it seemed that the Trump administration lost faith in its objective of regime change. And because of that, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic, the administration didn't pursue its objective of regime change much further, besides continuing sanctions. So in the end, the Venezuelan policy failed to achieve its objectives of a US-aligned government. Okay, let's fast forward to today. The Trump administration seems to be going at the issue from a completely different angle. Less about popular uprisings and international coalitions, and more thinly veiled threats to depose Maduro if he doesn't stand down voluntarily. That in and of itself was a big change in tactic, as Trump's first administration centered its hostile policy towards Maduro around his lack of legitimacy due to rigged presidential elections in 2018, and it used a Venezuelan opposition leader who was democratically elected in a free and fair legislative election in 2015 as its main tool for attempting regime change. In that way, the first Trump administration was still playing by the rules a little bit, by framing regime change as an attempt to return the country to its people through a democratically elected leader. The policy was still grounded in the idea of legitimacy. This time around, the objective might be the same, but the process and justification are completely different. Trump is looping Maduro in with his strategy of using drugs and gangs as the ultimate boogeyman, a tactic that he's employed domestically in the US, which has laid a very clever trap for the opposing Democrats, as their opposition places them rhetorically on the side of drugs and crime, which is a great tactic for ensuring continued support of the white middle-class voters that have been among the hardest hit by the opioid epidemic and which are crucial to winning swing states. As well, Maduro is deeply unpopular in the large Latino diasporas of Florida, so the aggressive policy is a great way to win their vote and change Florida from a swing state to a red state. Now, to be fair, there is quite a body of evidence that Venezuelan government and military officials have extensive ties to the drug trade. But you can make your own judgment on if drug smuggling is a national security threat to the US that justifies regime change, especially given the fact that fentanyl, the drug that causes the most deaths by far in the US, is almost entirely manufactured in Mexico. And for the other drugs, according to the US government itself, 74% of the cocaine coming to the US from South America goes through the Pacific. So it seems that Venezuela probably has very little impact on the overall drug imports into the US. Regardless, rather than go about fighting the drug trade in the typical manner of seizing ships and working with governments like Colombia and Mexico, Trump is militarizing the approach, much the same as he has done with law enforcement in US cities. And so he ordered a military buildup in the Caribbean over the summer, which was originally seen as the US just flexing its muscles. But then in September, the US started blowing up boats in international waters, accusing them of transporting drugs, but providing no evidence. Now that demonstrates another huge change in Trump's approach, because the strikes are possibly illegal under international law. But in his second term, Trump has adopted a might equals right mindset. Apparently, he had similar ideas like launching missiles into Mexico against the cartels in his first term, but was restrained by his advisors. But this time around, Trump has placed people around him like Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller, who rarely ever disagree with him. Rubio has long called for the overthrow of Maduro, and apparently Rubio and Miller are the real force behind the administration's new approach. So the rulebook has been thrown out, and diplomatic pressure is being replaced by blowing stuff up. And when people start asking questions about the legality of killing drug smugglers instead of arresting them, like the commander of US forces in Latin America recently did, they get fired. Okay, now let's just say that you don't buy the argument that Maduro, who many Americans have never even heard of, is a threat to the US, and that you don't think Trump buys it either. So then why the aggression? Well, from here we have to speculate, but it seems pretty obvious that Trump and his close advisor Stephen Miller want to finish what they failed to do in the first administration, and are simply changing their tactics to do so. On top of that, it could be that Trump loves to find distractions and easy enemies to fight. It seemed that way when the administration pursued a bombing campaign against the Houthis in Yemen this year, a group that poses no real threat to any US interest and which very few Americans have ever heard of. We know from the leaked Signal chat back in March that even Vice President J.D. Vance didn't really understand why they were bombing a group that really only threatened the trade of Europe. But the Houthis were an easy target because they're not recognized as an official government and their only real ally is Iran, a country with very little international diplomatic clout. So it was an easy way for the administration to show its strength without actually risking anything, and simultaneously warn Iran that it was willing to use force. A similar thought process could be applied to Venezuela, whose allies are countries like Russia and Cuba that the US doesn't mind irritating. And Venezuela, which has had poor relations with the US since 1999, doesn't pose a military threat to any US interest and has little ability of properly defending itself against the US military. So it's an adversary that can be poked with little risk of consequence. So Trump may have been looking for a punching bag abroad where he could use military force freely and found a great target in Maduro. If he was genuinely interested in fighting drug trade, he would probably be focusing more on Mexico as the origin point of almost all US fentanyl. But the consequences of potentially unleashing war right on the border are significantly higher. And of course there's the fact that the Mexican government largely cooperates with the US. On top of that, if the US is successful in toppling Maduro, it could make an example out of him for other governments of the region that have poor relations with the US, like Cuba and Nicaragua, essentially saying, look what we did to him, we can do the same to you if you don't fall in line. So now we'll see what happens. The most drastic scenario, a full-scale invasion of Venezuela, is almost certainly not in the realm of possibilities. Trump makes a big deal about staying out of forever wars, not getting into them. He's looking for quick, easy, and clean victories to project a sense of power. And therefore, if he is presented with an operational plan to eliminate Maduro using special forces or air power, he may take it. But that certainly carries its own risks. Or perhaps he takes concessions from Maduro, declares victory, and moves on. This is what he has often done in the past, and so that may be the most likely outcome. So we'll simply have to wait and see how things shake out. Well, I hope you enjoyed the summary. If you did, please like and subscribe. See ya.